Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Timo Parker, I'm a vocal coach and I want to help you improve your singing voice. Today's question is, what is the difference between falsetto and head voice and why they are not the same? You've probably heard of both of them, and especially in the beginning you can mistake one for another, or you maybe even think they are the same, but they're not. And we want to explore why they're not the same and how they sound different. But before we do that, I want to just take a step back and just look at the names of those two. One falsetto and the other one head voice. So falsetto actually comes from the Italian language and means faults or mistake, little mistake. And head voice, I think it's pretty clear. Definition of falsetto was given by grandmasters of singing in Italy back then when they were teaching bel canto, and they named the specific voice falsetto. So my question is, why would those grandmasters, those teachers, those mentors label it as wrong, as little mistake, but then would encourage the student to use it? It didn't really make sense to me. And in a second you will understand why we should maybe avoid falsetto and why it can be a mistake that you do. So what both sounds have in common, like every sound that we create, they are both created with your vocal cords. The way they meet each other and create the sound is actually different for head voice and falsetto. And the main difference is that in head voice you use the full length of your vocal cords, and in falsetto you don't. So what happens if you use falsetto is actually that you don't use the full length of your vocal cords and you start clipping them off. That means instead of one big surface where the vocal cords meet and vibrate, you divide them in two smaller sections. And because of that, the sound changes dramatically. The head voice sounds a bit fuller, a bit darker, and the falsetto sounds a lot thinner and a lot brighter. But also depending on your larynx position, if the larynx is very low and you create a falsetto sound, which is actually possible but very uncommon, then the falsetto can also sound a bit like a head voice sound. But in general, falsetto sounds very peepsy, very high, very thin. So falsetto is basically the very thin sounding voice that you create after your voice breaks. So you don't use the full length of your vocal cords anymore, and that's why the sound also changes so dramatically. So when you use falsetto, you don't use the full length of the vocal cords, and this can create actually a problem. And the higher the pitch goes, the more they have to move, the faster they have to move and meet each other. And this creates some kind of energy, some kind of heat. And if you just concentrate this heat on two smaller points instead of the whole surface of the vocal cords, you can actually burn yourself, you can get hoarse. And this can actually create vocal cord polyps. It's an area where it can create a bump and the vocal cords can't meet properly anymore. The sound gets very airy, the vocal cords have problems to create sounds. So if you use falsetto extensively, I would highly encourage you to stop that and use it wisely if you want to use it as an expression, which is actually not necessary, but if you really love the sound, you can do it. Just be aware that extensive use can lead to problems. So the question is, why does this happen? Why do the vocal cords clip off and do this phenomenon called falsetto? So if you sing in your head voice and the vocal cords meet in their full length, they get stretched more and more by the CT muscle, which is the muscle that I talked about in this video, to bring the vocal cords into the right length to create a higher pitch. So the higher we sing, the more stretched the vocal cords are. And because of the increased stretch of the vocal cords, they get thinner and thinner, and they get so thin that at some point they don't meet anymore because they are so stretched that they can't make contact anymore. And that's a natural process, and it's actually fine to not create a sound if you stay in head voice. But what we do most of the times to overcome this problem of not being able to create this pitch, this note, is that we force the vocal cords to come together. For example, with air pressure or through the falsetto. So the falsetto is actually a rescuing mechanism that we developed to be able to create higher pitches that we are normally not able to create. So it's a bit like cheating, so to say. So what you are doing in this case is you're forcing the vocal cords to create a sound, and that's why they don't meet each other anymore in the full length, and they start shortening the distance between each other. Versus in head voice, you use the mechanics of the instrument, and this is something we really want as singers. So we create an environment where they can vibrate freely and they don't touch anything else besides of themselves to create the sound, basically. So the disadvantages of falsetto are that you have a risk of injury, that falsetto always forces you to sing in a very low volume. Because you don't use the full length of your vocal cords, you're not going to be able to create very loud sounds in the falsetto. And the third and one of the biggest disadvantages of falsetto is that you can't change the sound of the falsetto. So if you sing a high pitch in falsetto, you can't modulate the sound really much. You're just stuck with this one sound and you can't go in a more metallic way or in a softer way. It's just this one sound that doesn't give you the freedom on how to form the sound of the note. So I've given you a lot of reasons why not to use falsetto, but there can be actually one exception where you want to use falsetto, and I also don't want to neglect it, because if you're singing, if you're making music, there are no rules. That means if you really want, and that's a conscious decision, you can use falsetto, because falsetto is probably the thinnest and small sounding thing you can create with your voice in a higher register. It sounds different than head voice, and if the song really requires it and you really want to have the sound, you should be free to use it. I just think it's important to know what the differences are and that you make a conscious decision on if you want to use the falsetto or not. Because most of the times what we are really looking for is not the sound of the falsetto, but something else. So whenever you can, stay away from it, but if your performance really requires this sound, then use it. Just be aware that you should not use it constantly because of the risk of injury. On the other hand, if you use the head voice, it is really difficult to create a high note in low volume. Because of the contraction of the CT muscles, the vocal cords get stretched and there's a lot of tension on them. And the only way to soften the sound is actually to open up the system. That means lower the larynx all the way and open it up all the way so the vocal cords start to get even further away from each other. And the result of that is that the sound actually gets lower in volume, but it's really difficult to do, especially in the beginning. So if you use head voice in a higher register, always try to start a bit louder and then try to get it into a lower volume, into a piano or pianissimo, but do it slowly and be sure that you're still using your head voice. That's more of an advanced practice, I would say. So I think the benefits of head voice are clear by now. You should always try to use head voice over falsetto, at least in my opinion, and be aware that even though I think that falsetto should be a no-go, especially in the beginning, you can use it if you make a conscious decision. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped you to differentiate between those two. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. I have more vocal training videos planned on this channel, so make sure to subscribe to not miss out on them. And I see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.